when we're talking about a super story or transmedia, we're just simply talking about how to express an IP across multiple mediums and multiple platforms in a way where it all works together to create a different business model for creators and a different experience for the audience. It's taking not a product-centric approach to entertainment, but it's taking a brand-centric approach to entertainment.
You are listening to the Act One podcast. I'm your host, James Duke. If you enjoy what you hear, do us a favor and subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends and neighbors and countrymen. My guest today is author and media expert Houston Howard. Houston is an entrepreneur, creator, producer, professor, author, speaker, and thought leader in the space of multi-platform transmediated entertainment, or what he simply calls superstory. Driven by a passion and desire to build generational IP that leverages both narrative velocity and brand scalability, Houston has created superstory IP and multi-platform strategy for the likes of Fox, CBS, Mattel, Disney Imagineering, Electronic Arts, Wizards of the Coast, West Coast Customs, Slinky, and more. Houston has published 3 books focused on process of creating transmediated entertainment, including his most recent and most successful, You're Gonna Need a Bigger Story, available on Amazon. As an industry mentor for the Producers Guild of America, an advisory board member of the Beyond Games Conference, a contributor to the Television Academy of Arts and Sciences, and special advisor to the U.S.-China Film Summit, Houston is a wonderful guy who I know you will learn a lot from today. I hope you enjoy. Houston, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Super excited to be here, Jimmy.
And you're coming to me live from your new home in Texas, right? You are one of the recent people who have moved out of California to the great state of Texas. Is that right?
Yes, smells like freedom and brisket here. It's amazing. No, we transitioned during COVID. We have a 6-year-old. We just had another one. So my wife was pregnant, and the COVID changed the city, and it changed the city for the worse. But I think it changed the industry for the better, because it sort of pushed everything to where you can do so much stuff remote. And thankfully, you have a place like Austin that has a really good intersection of entrepreneurship, ministry, and a great film and entertainment community. And so it just it checked a lot of different boxes in a lot of different ways. And so we made the move just a couple months ago. Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about just give people a little bit about your background. So you were out here for 14 years now. Now you're working in a Texas. You're originally, though, from Kentucky. Is that right?
Kentucky, the great state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Grew up in Kentucky. Graduated college in West Virginia, went to law school in Virginia, and practiced law there in Virginia, focused on film and entertainment litigation. And so I consider myself at this point a recovering lawyer, almost completely recovered. Decided sort of early into that I wanted to be on the other side of the transaction in the entertainment space. And so much to my mother-in-law's chagrin, decided not to practice and moved to LA with sort of no contacts, no backing, didn't go to film school, anything like that. And just tried to kind of figure it out once I got out here. So it's very much sort of like an odd path into the industry, but that was my path.
And how did you become this guy who's become the transmedia guy? Like, was this something that you kind of just fell into in this kind of journey, or is this something that you actively pursued? This was something that you thought, man, this is the approach I've always wanted to take with filmmaking, and so now I'm gonna tell everybody else the kind of the secrets of it and kind of help them understand it? Or is it something that just you're just out there trying to figure things out as a filmmaker and a storyteller, and then you kind of stumbled into this a little bit?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, I'm a child of like the 80s and the 90s, and so I grew up raised on big IP, multi-platform IP. Big fan of things, He-Man and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Batman, and the Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and I loved all that stuff, and they all existed on multiple platforms, and so I was just, that was my taste in entertainment, and that hasn't really changed. I've nuanced it a little bit, but I'm still a fan of those things, and so as an adult, I'm still a fan of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. I like big IP. I like multi-platform IP, and so ultimately, I think what creators do is ultimately they want to make the things that they like, and that's usually sort of your first instinct as a musician. You want to start playing the music that you're a fan of and learn the songs that you love. And so I was always sort of intrigued by that. I was a heavy creative in high school, heavy creative writer, wrote a lot of poetry, played a lot of tabletop role-playing games. So not like video role-playing games, but like dice and pencils type of role-playing games, like Dungeons and Dragons, but never actually Dungeons and Dragons. I wasn't a fan of that game, but I spent thousands of hours playing with my friends on tabletop role-playing games. Attribute 90% of my storytelling ability to tabletop role-playing games, which is a tremendous tool to learn how to tell a story. And then when I got into college, I wrote heavily for the stage, wrote a couple plays in college, which were really cool. And then, but also invented board games. It was a weird hobby I had. I just learned making games and licensing them off to manufacturers, and I leaned into a lot of different things. When I got into law school, I had a lot of friends who went to the film school at the same university. And that got me into starting to write for the screen. And I started to write and produce short films while I was in law school with my buddies in film school. And so by the time I got out to LA, I had, I had dabbled in a lot of different forms of entertainment. While I was in law school, I also had the early like internet radio show before they had really podcasts, sort of like a internet radio show that was a lot of fun. And so I always sort of dabbled. So when I got into LA, I just wanted to write and produce movies. That's it. And so I started hooking up with people who wanted to do the same, but they had a variety of talents. And so one of my buddies was going to act in this project I was putting together, but he also had 20 years in the music industry as a songwriter and a producer. And this other guy was going to be my editor, but he had a technology and comic book background. Another guy had a business and marketing background. This other person was savvy in live events. And I said, hey, you know what? Let's not waste all those talents. Let's figure out how to leverage them all together in some crazy thing. And we tried it, and it was wildly difficult and not very successful, but it never made sense to me not to try to do that. And so I went on about a 2-year research project early into my LA tenure, just trying to really figure out and study, using my lawyer superpower of like forensic auditing and trying to like look at things like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and what Marvel was doing, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all these things. I started breaking them down. Like, what are the creative decisions that they made that allowed what they do to work so well? What are the non-successful projects that I would see, and like, why didn't they work very well? And I started to see patterns. I started to see, oh, okay, if you make this, all the people that made this one decision, that all worked out for them. All these people that didn't make that decision, it didn't work out for them. Therefore, I will make that decision every time, right? And so I just started to form a rubric of, this is how you develop multi-platform IP, and that's something that I couldn't find anywhere. I was self-taught in film and television. I went and bought every Michael Wiese book on the market, and I read as many things. I went to as many conferences, and actually, the very first event I ever went to in LA was an Act One event at the Directors Guild. And I went there and was just, so impressed and enamored with this subset of the industry, which was, the Christian creators. And I will never forget, it was the writer, a writer of Deja Vu, and also the writer of one of the Hellraiser movies that was there. And it was really super interesting to see how they were navigating the industry and all that. So I just kind of I tried to give myself my own master's degree self-taught, but I never found anything in the multi-platform space. And so I talked to one of the richest men in LA at some event, and this guy was a real estate guy. And I just asked him like that. Yeah. So what do if you're trying to break in an industry that you don't have the official credentials for, what advice would you give? And he said, write a book. He said, the best thing you could do is write a book, because whenever you write a book, people presume you're an expert. And he said they see your name on a book, and there's something about seeing your name on a book that just conveys expertise. He said that should be your business card. So find something that you have an instinct about, that you have an insight about. Obviously you don't want to BS it. Actually figure something out. Write a book about it, and then use that as your business card. He said, and in America, no one ever throws away a book, no matter how irrelevant or ugly the cover is. Like we don't throw away books, right? He said they'll put it on their shelf, and if they ever need the thing that you're talking about, your name's right there on the spine. And I said, okay, cool. I go and I'll write a book. And so I wrote about this process, this rubric of how to shepherd an idea into a multi-platform world. And I was going to self-publish, but I sent it to Michael Weesey because I read all the Michael Weesey books, and they ended up publishing it. And that launched me into this space in a major way, because there was a devoid of content in the market for that. So that's sort of how I got to where I am.
And that book was that You're Gonna Need a Bigger Story? Is that your first book?
My first book was actually Make Your Story Really Stinking Big.
Make Your Story. That was so you've written two books?
Written two books, right? Written two books.
Make Your Story Really Stinking Big, and then the second one is You're Gonna Need a
Bigger Story.
Got it.
And so I pushed that out. Make Your Story Really Stinking Big. Did really well. 2 weeks after it hit the market, I got a call from Dave Voss, the Senior VP of Product and Design at Mattel. And he said, hey, Houston, I read your book. We'd love for you to come in and talk to us about, this process you're talking about, which is something I never considered. I always just wanted to have this process for me to create my own stuff. But when Mattel wants you to come into Mattel, you come into Mattel. And so I went into Mattel, and they were working on a Monster High, and that's a $500 million a year brand for them. And they said, we got this problem with Monster High, and they had cartoons, they had books, they had web series, they had all these things, and they said, but the audience isn't migrating. There's some issues with it, and we can't figure out why. Can you take a look? And I was able to then sort of diagnose, this is the problem here. There's a continuity problem here. This story really isn't best for this platform, and I just tried to kind of tinker, and that sort of got me into, once you get that sort of a gig, then you're able to kind of spin that into some other things. And so I've actively been, for the past decade, been, working with studios and networks and people in the music industry, people in the video game industry, film and television, board games, everything in between. And then also, working with independent creators, novelists, things like that, while developing my own original content simultaneously. So, but then a couple years ago, then decided to publish my second book, because once you're in the trenches for a while, you learn new things, and you see, right. Actually, there's some nuances there that I didn't see first. And so then I published You're Gonna Need a Bigger Story, which was sort of the updated version of that first one. So,
got it.
So that's where we are today.
Why don't we go ahead and just define terms for people who haven't read your books and haven't heard you speak before? I know there's a lot of people, because you've been so gracious, and you've come in on a pretty semi-regular basis,
yep.
and have spoken at Act One, and it's always always ranked as one of the most popular classes that we offer our producing students and executive students, even our writers as well.
Sure.
But why don't we kind of just help people? Let's define some terms a little bit, because there might still be some people who are scratching their heads. So what is transmedia, or what is a super story?
Yeah, so transmedia is sort of this funky word that that the industry uses. So the Producers Guild ratified a transmedia producer credit, back in 2007 or something like that. So they use that term transmedia, which is sort of this clunky word that I don't particularly love because it just doesn't have any, people don't have connotation to it. But that's sort of the industry term. I call it a super story. I feel like it's a little bit more plain language. But ultimately, when we're talking about a super story or transmedia, we're just simply talking about how to express an IP across multiple mediums and multiple platforms in a way where it all works together to create a different business model for creators and a different experience for the audience. It's taking not a product centric approach to entertainment, but it's taking a brand centric approach to entertainment, so that you're looking at every story you have and thinking what's sort of the bigger vision of it and how can I conceive of it in a different way. I mean, we've been trained so much in entertainment to be so myopic about, we got to focus on that one thing. And I feel like that myopic vision keeps things from scaling, and especially in today's market is more important than ever. But ultimately, what we're talking about is how do we tell different news stories using every tool that we have in the toolbox, every medium, every platform, in a way where it all works together. And so a lot of people mistake it for a very similar term, multimedia. And multimedia is that, traditional 80s, 90s franchise where you take a movie and you or a book and you just adapt that story across platform. It's the same. It's the book that is that's the movie, and that movie becomes the video game, and the video game becomes and it's all the same story across channels. And so when you use the same story in multiple mediums, that's just your traditional multimedia franchise. When we nuance it and say transmedia, we're using multiple mediums in a similar way, except now we're never telling the same story twice. Now the story in the book spins off or leads into the story that's in the movie, that then spins off to the story that's in the video game, that then culminates into the graphic novel, and all those things work together to create a greater whole. And so, it's much more difficult to be able to pull that off. But in today's market, you're seeing just the audiences are now wildly preferring new stuff as opposed to that repurposed story. And so whereas that traditional franchise worked really well for a long time, now you're just seeing the shift. And so now there's more of a need for this transmediated content.
And your first book came out when? When did your first book come out?
Oh, gosh. That was probably back in 2014, 2012, something like that. It was, yeah.
I mean, you were talking about this before people were doing it, and now it seems like everyone is doing it. So it really seems like you were really in on the idea really early on, because I can't turn anything on nowadays without there's so much world building going on.
Sure.
I can't turn anything on to find out, wait, I got to watch what now? I got to read what now? I got to listen to what podcast in order to catch up with what's happening. Yeah, there's so many different outlets for story and for content, and
it's really interesting. And it's exciting. But you're right. I was definitely forward thinking, and there was a lot of people talking about it. There were some, a lot of academics talking about it. A guy named Henry Jenkins, a guy named Jeff Gomez. They're sort of heavyweights in that space. But the problem is a lot of it was rooted in academia. And it was a lot of like super philosophical high end stuff, which I'm a nerd about that stuff. I like all that academic stuff. But at the end of the day, as a practitioner, you're like, okay, so what do I do? How do I use this? How do I leverage this tool? And it's, like my grandma used to, I would go over to her house and I remember there was a Bible, this big, fancy looking Bible on the coffee table on a doily with a glass dome thing over it. And that's a Bible you never use. It's just like a decorative Bible. And that always bugged me. I'm like, why wouldn't you want to use the Bible? And so I felt like that was sort of how transmedia was, how the academics were talking about it back then, where it was on a doily under a glass bowl, and it was fancy to look at, but to try to create it was a bridge too far. And so that's where I feel like I found my lane in that conversation of saying, okay, cool. Like there's the academic side, which is awesome, but then let's start putting a practical roadmap out for creators to follow. And now, but you're right. I would talk to people in the industry, which, everybody in the industry, as you know, has been doing everything the same way for 100 years. And it was very frustrating. They acted like I was from Mars. And they were like, oh, Houston, that's great. But, it's not practical. And I'll never forget it. I got a meeting with one of my top 5 producers of all time, and he's a friend to Act One, and I actually got the meeting with him when I was at an Act One event. I saw him. I was like, dude, I'd love to hook up with you, and he was gracious enough to give me the meeting, which is amazing. And I got in there and I was talking to him about a project, talked to him about all this stuff, and he always he had this confused look on his face. He's a traditional film guy, and he's like, Houston, listen, you just got to think a lot smaller. He said, that's what you need to do. He's like, he says, you're thinking just way too big. You gotta, and I felt deflated, and I understood sort of the heart behind it. What he was saying, he was like, don't try to eat the whole elephant in one bite. Like, let's figure out sort of a practical way forward. But like it was a bit deflating because he wanted me to shrink my vision, and that's something that I'm like, man, like I'm just a big vision guy. I'm like a blue sky Pixar type of a guy when I'm thinking about this stuff, and but I felt like I was beating my head against a wall taking these traditional film and television meetings in Hollywood until we started to see the shift when streaming started to come into the conversation, when the platforms started booming, when the social platforms started to come into the mix, and we started seeing the democratization of technology. We're started seeing the commoditization, the oversaturation of content. And then when that started to happen, all those same people that were like, Houston, you're kind of crazy. You're like, you're coming in like a crazy Pentecostal preacher, talking about this thing from the future. Now they're coming to me, you're like, dude, you were right. Now what do I, how do I handle this? I had a Fox executive. I saw him at an event, and I pitched him a project a couple of years before, and he sort of laughed. He's like, Houston, that'll never happen. This is not you're not going to see this model sort of take hold in Hollywood. Saw him 2 years later at an event. He had a few drinks at that point, and he came up to me and like shook me, grabbed me by my shoulders and shook me. He said, you were right the entire time. And, which is good validation. Didn't help, my bank account at that point, but it was like, but now especially with COVID, it's even transitioned things even more. And so, I'm thankful that the Lord kind of had me in the right place, right time with that right message. And so now it's kind of, sitting squarely into where we are today.
I think there might have been a mindset at one point that you could exploit a story, or for our purposes we'll just call it an IP.
Sure.
You could exploit an IP to a point.
Yeah.
And then you move away and you go come up with some other idea.
Sure.
And I think it's completely changed now. You can not only go off and create a new IP, but you can go back to other IPs and continue to exploit them by just looking at it through the perspective of a different character. Like you said, not telling the same story. Now I'm going to tell a different story in that same setting, that same geographical setting, that same time period with the same aesthetic. But it's going to be from a different character's perspective, or it's going to be from a previous timeline, a prequel, a sequel, or whatever. And now it's like all these infinite ways you can exploit an IP, and you kind of have the birth of a world, of a universe. Sure. And I think an example that we can kind of look at and exploit and kind of dissect are the ones that I wouldn't say they were the first, but they seem to have been the ones to really grab this thing by the throat and really kind of go after it, because I think they were uniquely positioned in the marketplace for it, as the Walking Dead people.
Sure.
So you and I think it's interesting because The Walking Dead probably started off very differently than where it is now, in that you had a film guy, Frank Darabont, who decided to adapt
Yep.
a comic book series into a traditional TV show, and AMC was the HBO of basic cable. They were the prestige channel at that time,
Yep.
or at least they were right in the middle of that.
Sure.
And so in the middle of Mad Men, and I think Breaking Bad was on at the time. I could be wrong, but so right in the middle of their, prestige time, they're going to do a zombie show.
Yeah.
So it was a little like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But it's Frank Darabont, right? A traditional kind of film guy. And obviously there was a falling out with Darabont, and he went his own separate way from them. And they went through several showrunners, but they eventually landed on, I think his name is Gimple. I think it's Scott Gimple.
Yeah.
And now he's head of his title is like head of the Walking Dead universe. Like he's in charge of, he found a position bigger than a showrunner.
Yes.
And it was kind of invented. So they already had the comic books, and they went, wait a second, we were able to exploit the comic books for a TV show. What if we exploited it into new worlds, new stories that we could tell in video games?
Yeah.
And then they were like, wait, what if we could exploit it in another TV series? What if we could exploit it in another movie? I mean, in a film? What if we could exploit it? And so now they're expanding this universe and telling all these other stories, and it grew out of that traditional mindset. And that's
sure.
I guess my question to you is that show, and then of course the Marvels and things like that, it makes sense when you describe Superstory, when you think about it in those terms. But what about just a small coming of age drama, or like, in other words, does this work for every story? Like, can you look at every story through this lens, or are there only some stories that you can that are super stories?
I think, and I get this question a lot. I have never found the story that can't be extended in some way. I've yet to find that unicorn of looking at someone and say, "Yep, that's it." Like, you can't do anything with that. I've never found that. And every story, I think, can be extended in a way that benefits the project. Because when you look at The Walking Dead is a great example. And they've had big things like the spin-off series that the limited miniseries of the World Beyond. They've had mobile games, they've had console games, they've had book series. And so, if you watch The Walking Dead, they have a whole book series that just follows the people in Woodbury. And so where the governor was. And so you don't follow Rick and the gang. It's just, let's just learn about Woodbury. And then if you had been reading the books when they debuted the governor in the show, now you have a whole different perspective on the governor. But so they did a lot of big stuff. And now they're spinning off into Rick Grimes' feature films, another, more spinoff shows, Fear the Walking Dead, a Daryl and Carol spinoff. But they, one of the most interesting emotional things that they did in the transmedia space was if you watch the pilot of The Walking Dead, and there's the very first zombie, the very first walker you ever see in The Walking Dead, is this half zombie, and the fan base, the fandom calls it Bicycle Girl, because it's the first one that Rick Grimes sees, and it makes him fall off his bicycle, right? And then they dubbed her Bicycle Girl, and it's half of a zombie that's crawling across this field. And Rick Grimes sort of, scurries away, but he comes back at the very end of the pilot, and he goes back and finds that same half of a zombie. And, she had made it like 50 yards across this field by that point. But this time, he had his hat, had his gun. He was, he had sort of come to terms with everything. And he walked up to the zombie, but instead of just blowing its brains out, he bent down in front of it and looked the zombie in its eyes and said, "I'm sorry this happened to you," and then shot it, right? But when he had that line, that actually what hooked me with the series, because I'm like, okay, that's this interesting emotional hook that felt different than the other zombie stuff. And what he did is he recognized that zombie as a person. That zombie used to be somebody. And so what AMC did is they went and they produced a web series called Torn Apart. That was the origin story of who that zombie was. And
Oh,
and
interesting.
it
Wow.
was super interesting, because what you find out is because Rick Grimes validated that zombie as a person. And then you say, oh, then that poses a question. If if she was a person, who was she? Well, what you see is then you see this web series of a mom who has two kids during the zombie apocalypse. Now, when you watch The Walking Dead, you never actually see the zombie apocalypse happen. It's like Rick Grimes is in a coma while it all goes down. He wakes up and it's already done. So you never actually see it go down. In that web series, you actually see it happening, and you have this woman who is trying to protect her two kids, and her husband isn't home from work, and she doesn't know what to do, and eventually, and she finally hears somebody in a helicopter saying, if you're still alive, get to the green concession stand at the park at the baseball field, and there's going to be somebody that can take you to safety. And so she finally just says, screw it, let's we're going to go. And she takes her kids and she tries to get to that green concession stand, and it ends up where she jumps in a car. She tries to drive the car. There's a zombie in the car that bites her in the arm, and so we all know from zombie lore, like, you get bitten, you're going to turn into a zombie. And there's something happened earlier in the story where she knows that that's what happens as well. And so she eventually they make a run for it without the car, and ultimately she sees that they're not going to make it, and so knowing that she's going to die anyway, she gives herself up to a group of zombies so that her kids can go and get to that green concession stand. And the zombies swarm her, literally tear her apart, turn her into a half of a zombie. And you see the last beat of that web series is her as a half of a zombie, and she flips over and she starts crawling. And that's where we meet her in the pilot. But then when you go back and rewatch the pilot, you realize, oh, she's crawling to that green concession stand because that's where her kids went.
Wow.
And it was like, it's so heavy. And I'm like, oh wow, that's so amazing. And you know who the showrunner or the creator of that web series was? Scott Gimple. Where like he the first thing that he directed for The Walking Dead was that web series that got him a foot into so obviously he graduated. But that was such an interesting emotional backstory that we look at sort of the big stuff that The Walking Dead does, but some of the small stuff, that how they've extended that story is great too. And so people say, well, does every story need that? Like, well, why wouldn't you want to do that with every story? Like, that's like if it's good, if you can tell a quality story, you're not pushing out crap. If it's good, then then why wouldn't you want to take that opportunity? Because here's the shift of the mindset, Jimmy. Is I'm a firm belief that if you approach building an entertainment brand the way an entrepreneur approaches a consumer brand, you now build it differently. And here's my question of like, should I transmediate something? My question is always well, do the fans want it? Like, would the fans love it? And typically, if you have fans, just us as fans, like, we want more story. Like, Game of Thrones fans want more Game of Thrones. Marvel fans want more Marvel. Drake fans want more Drake music. We just love the stuff. We want more of the things that we love. And so usually when filmmakers, especially filmmakers who get super snooty about this, where they'll say, you know what, this is just a one-off project, and I'm just going to go kind of turn my attention elsewhere. The mindset they have is not thinking about their fans. It's thinking about what they want to do creatively, right? But an entrepreneur, if they see a line of people that are outside their coffee shop who want coffee, they don't say, you know what, I'm just going to close down. Like, I'm just going to close this business and go do something else. No, you serve those fans because it doesn't make sense not to. And I think that's the big shift with a transmedia or superstory mindset. It becomes fan-centric and an audience-centric. And I think one of the highest honors you can ever have as a creator is for people to say, Jimmy, I love the story that you told and I want more. Please give me more. And I'm willing to pay for more. I'm willing to and that is so cool and so rare and so difficult to do. But when you get to that point where that happens and you say, you know what? My artistic sensibilities want me to go do something else and not continue to serve that story. I feel like that's a selfish mindset. And I feel like that's not a smart business mindset. And the more we can kind of take the perspective of the audience and give the audience what they want. Now, the audience wants something good. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, you can't just push out anything you want and expect them to, they'll tell you about it. But that's the heart of the mindset for me is how can I give the fans more story? And, as an independent creator, how do I potentially give any investor into my project another stream of revenue? I think the two coolest things that could ever happen to you are one, for fans to say, I love your stuff, I want more. But really the coolest thing as an independent creator is for somebody to say, I'm going to take my hard-earned money and invest it into your dreams. And for you to say, you know what? There's a way to continue to exploit this thing in a positive way that can be great for the fans and great for you. But because of my artistic sensibility, I'm just going to cut that off right there. I feel like that's kind of like being a crappy person. And you need to bless that person for the rest of their life for believing in you when other people didn't. And so, and it doesn't have to be, either or. Like, you can figure out ways to continue to serve an audience while you go do some other projects, right? Like, find collaborators, find somebody to hand the baton off to. Like, there's, but you have to have that different mindset. And so usually when I hear people say, does every story need transmedia? What about my coming of age character piece? Does it really need it? I don't think it needs it. What you're really saying is your investors don't need more revenue and your audience doesn't need more story. That's really what you're saying. And neither one of those should ever be true. Now, that being said, do certain stories lend themselves easier to multi-platform? Yeah. Yes, of course. Which is why you kind of need to get in there and kind of tinker with the creative, and why I work so much with creators and writers on the front end during the development process to say, you know what, if you just like sprinkle this into your story and you build this out a little bit and you include this character in your film, and you can create those opportunities that a lot of people accidentally create, they back into it. But now that we can kind of see the rubric, you can start to install those things that can make it easier to expand on the back end. So there's some, and ultimately, there's certain characteristics that you look for, but ultimately that question of, can everything be transmediated? I think there's 100% yes.
It's really interesting because, and I like even from the to look at it even from the perspective of, if I'm the creator, if I'm the creator of story, and I need someone's help to get my story out there, and so that person who's going to help me is an investor.
Sure.
How am I helping them? And I like that. I like that mindset, which is, if they're helping me accomplish my dreams and my goals, how can I help them accomplish theirs? So
100%. What's
wrong with me going, okay, how can I leverage this even more so in your favor, partner, friend, investor, so that it could benefit you? I like that. I like that. But yeah, this goes back to, having said all that.
Yeah, sure.
Right. It's still got to be good. Right. Yes, so what are some examples of super story that, I mean, obviously we talked about The Walking Dead, but what are some examples that maybe have surprised even you, that you thought, boy, that's really good super storytelling?
Yeah. I mean, so you look at some like large IP examples. Really, my first sort of modern example that I love to always go back to is The Matrix. And in The Matrix, the way the Wachowskis crafted The Matrix was tremendous with the obviously the 3 films, going to be 4 films now, with the Animatrix 20 animated short films, with comic books, and massive multiplayer online game, and they all told different parts of the story. The PlayStation 2 game, Enter the Matrix, they all followed different characters, told different parts of the story. That was just so good, and that was sort of the early 2000s when that was released, and it was really forward thinking. And I remember like experiencing that and thinking, wow, this is just an incredible thing and how tightly it was woven together. I was just really impressed with that. I'm looking now of what's going to the market. And I don't think you can get better than the MCU, what the MCU is doing, not just across film, but film and television. If you want to see transmedia happen in front of your face, it's hopefully you watched WandaVision, and you're watching The Mandalorian and Star Wars, and it's like incredible to see this happen. And I was just so impressed with WandaVision, and I was not excited about WandaVision because Wanda Maximoff.
I was the same way, actually. I was very lukewarm on it.
Yeah,
the idea of it. Yeah, before I watched it.
And I thought Wanda Maximoff and Vision are like 2 supporting characters from the Age of Ultron, which was like the worst Avengers movie. And okay, she was kind of cool when she battled Thanos, but like ultimately, like I'm not excited about those characters at all going into the show. And so a whole show built around 2 characters I wasn't invested in. I was like, and it's kind of like weird, and I didn't get the posters, and like I was like, why do they look like they're in a sitcom? And but holy smokes, Jimmy, like that was incredible storytelling and so experimental, and so it was just bold. It was just a bold storytelling.
Unbelievably creative.
Yes.
They made creative choices that you had never seen in that form of entertainment ever before, which was wonderful.
It was fantastic. But then you saw how it was tied in, and you saw where they were planting the seeds to spin new stuff off that. And you saw this resurgence of people going back and watching the Age of Ultron in a whole new light. And like you just saw it happen. And, you saw the same thing even previous to that in The Mandalorian season 2, I mean, spoiler alert. But like, when Ahsoka Tano shows up and they're pulling in animated characters into live action, and they're pulling characters from Return of the Jedi back into this show, and you just see how they're connecting everything, and how they're connecting back to the Clone Wars, they're connecting back to Star Wars Rebels, they're connecting back to Return of the Jedi, and then you see how they're planning spin-offs off from that, and then you see the investor presentation that they did where they have like 9 or 10 other things planned, all of which are awesome. And you see they just announced the Obi-Wan Kenobi for the Kenobi show, the new cast, which is like incredible cast that they're going to have, and it's just like you're seeing this kind of play out in front of your face. And you're like, wow, okay, they're doing it really, really, really well. And so, but so I think the MCU, Star Wars, obviously, I think what you're seeing in the Harry Potter space is really cool. Obviously, with the books adapted into the movies, but once it got over to the movies, you have the Pottermore experience, 10,000 extra pages of Harry Potter material just as a digital experience. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. They have a new console video game that's coming out. They have a mobile game that's come out. It's now they're talking about a potentially a cartoon and a live action show set in that universe. That's the scuttlebutt around Warner's. They're exploring that in a major way. The biggest driver of multi-platform transmediated IP are video games, right? And what you're seeing with whether it's Halo getting the new show for the Paramount Network, and you're seeing video games really driving the engines, and I don't think it's because people love video games even more, but video games, like the story worlds are built in a way that leans into it, and they have these rabid fan bases, and so that that's going well too. But then you look at other things, some smaller opportunities that I've always been impressed with, like something even in the music space where you have like Dolly Parton, right? Love Dolly, she's awesome. She has that iconic song Jolene, and about a woman who is pleading with this like harlot named Jolene, please don't come and take my man. and so this iconic song. But then there's a Netflix series called Dolly Parton Heartstrings, where they do an episode about every single one of Dolly Parton's songs. The very first episode is Jolene, but you get it from Jolene's perspective. And when you see the whole story play out from Jolene's perspective, you're like, wow, she wasn't after this guy at all. She wasn't trying to take anybody's man, right? It was all a big misunderstanding. It's really kind of the husband's fault. Like, it was a whole, it added to the story in a really super smart, interesting way. The same with a guy named Kid Cudi. He's a hip hop artist. He has a concept album called Intergalactic, and an adult animated Netflix series where every single episode is extending the story of every single one of his songs, right? And so you're seeing it in a couple different ways. Even you look at something like, whether you like Kanye, hate Kanye, right? The Jesus is King album. He dropped the Jesus is King album, simultaneously released an IMAX movie that was this art film from inside his head of his journey to faith. And then he had, his Sunday service, live events, and he tied them all together in a really smart way. One of my favorite examples, though, is Quentin Tarantino, because you get a lot of snooty filmmakers that they don't call them movies, they call them films, and they like one of those people that and listen, I love film, I love filmmaking, but soon you get some fancy pants filmmakers that, what I'm talking about, Jimmy. They reject this stuff, or like, why they cringe when you start talking about Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and things like that. But like, what you see with Quentin Tarantino's, he did Django Unchained, which was such a great film. And he wrote a sequel to Django, and it was Django/Zorro. The official sequel to Django was a Django Zorro crossover. And the studio would make it. Yeah, really? The studio refused to make it because it was that's crazy. Like, just have it be about Django. But as you can imagine, Tarantino, he's like, no, what makes it cool is the Zorro aspect, right? And so they were at an impasse, and they wouldn't make the movie. So what did he do? He went and created a comic book that is the official sequel, canonized, blessed by Quentin Tarantino. The official sequel to Django Unchained is Django/Zorro, the comic book, right? Which is super, super smart. And so,
because and then also, didn't he just release his novel version of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? So it's like, he was able to even do more stuff, right? There's stuff in his novel that isn't even in his own film.
Isn't in the movie. Exactly, right. And that creates the incentive for the audience to check it out. And so all of a sudden, like, he instinctively gets it. And now that the comic's done so well, the comic's been the Django/Zorro is now being developed into a movie, of course. Christopher Nolan, if you watched Interstellar, Matthew McConaughey wasn't the first guy to go out to space to look for a new planet to live on. Matt Damon went first and never came back. Him and his crew, Team Zero, never came back. And you never figure out what happened to him. Christopher Nolan went and produced a digital comic book, only released online, called Absolute Zero, that answered that question of what happened to that Team Zero and why they never returned. He didn't make any money off of it. It was all it was an investment into the fan base, right? And so whether it's like big stuff to small stuff, whether it's like a web series that gives you more information, whether Overwatch is a video game where it's just a battle royale video game, you really don't have any character development. They do all the character development in comic books and animated short films that they just include on their website, and they use that to build community, right? And so you're just seeing this more and more in the marketplace, both in large aspects and also very small aspects that I think are kind of cool.
Yeah, I remember my first time experiencing that and realizing, okay, this is an actual thing, was J.J. Abrams' Star Trek.
Yeah.
And they released a prequel graphic novel comic book that set up his Star Trek.
Yep.
So it introduced I forget the bad guy, because he was such a forgettable bad guy. Right. The one that was played by, what's his name? Anyway, the Romulan or whatever. They set up his whole backstory, and his whole conflict with Spock and everything was all in graphic novel. They didn't even cover it in the. Actually, I think it's in a 30-second montage in the film, but you get all the character character study in the comic, and
Yeah,
that you may or may not read, but the vast majority of people won't. The fans will. Which, by the way, Jeff Talk, you borrowed that from me in comic book, and you never gave it back to me. I just want to. I doubt he's listening, but if he
call
is,
him out.
I fully remember I gave you that.
I love that. J.J. Abrams is so smart. I mean, you go back, my first J.J. Abrams transmedia experience was Lost. And, there were a lot of issues with Lost, right? I ended up loving it. But, the way they built the Dharma Initiative mythology online was so amazing. And that was like, early internet stuff that was going on in the early 2000s. And the way they were leveraging all of that extra mythology that tied into the show about the Dharma Initiative was just so impressive and so cool. I think the one of the things that shaped me as a fan was I saw the Blair Witch Project the day it came out. Me and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, we were in Cincinnati, Ohio. This would have been 1998. So very not pre-internet, but early internet, still like the free AOL disk dial-up internet. And we'd never heard of the Blair Witch Project. We walked into this indie theater in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we were like, this looks like an interesting movie. And we sat and watched it, and we were like freaked out, right? I mean, it was like the first found footage film. People don't realize, like, the younger people don't realize how crazy that was, right? And we walked out. I mean, as Christians, we were like praying for these people and like interceding for them, like it was like it
really happened. This thing really happened. These people are still missing.
Yeah, Father, help us. Protect these people. We're praying Psalm 91 and the whole thing. So we walked out like debating, was that real or wasn't that real? And we're like, it can't be real. They couldn't release that, but it didn't seem scripted. And the way they shot it, like they had us, right? So we said, you know what? We're going to go to the great arbiter of truth, which is the internet. And so, because at that point, people still thought the internet was true. So, so we went and I started looking all this stuff up, and guess what? Like, what did I find? I found news stories about these teens that were missing, and news articles from newspapers, and all this extra content that I'm like, see, it's real. And for 2 weeks, the world believed it was real until they came out in the MTV Video Music Awards, and they revealed it was all sort of a swerve. But like, to me, I'm like, wow, you can do that. You can use the internet to be able to shoot these extra videos, and the way they invested, even just just to do a fake news video, that takes time and money and effort and a crew and the whole thing, right? And it wasn't easy back then to do any of that stuff. They didn't have cell phones, didn't have any of these, the iPhones and things like that to do it, but they did it, and it created this tremendous mythology that they benefited from. And so and then you had the law situation that really developed it even more. And then one of my favorite shows I don't even remember when this was, because all time and space stopped in COVID, but like Watchmen. I don't know if you watch Watchmen. Watchmen was tremendous. Watchmen's Damon Lindelof, right? The showrunner, I'm a big Damon Lindelof fan, who was also co-showrunner of Lost, right? Sort of the protege of J.J. Abrams. He ran the show for Watchmen. And what's amazing about Watchmen was in Watchmen, there was a FBI agent named Petey who was tasked with finding out more about, these vigilantes. Through the HBO website, the Watchmen website, they had Peteypedia, which was all of his case files that you could follow. And after every episode, you could go and read the Tulsa Times newspaper that had, that had these news articles. You could read police reports and medical reports and internal memorandums of the FBI that between episodes just gave you more information. Right. And what's crazy is if you watch the show, Jimmy, you remember in the very first episode, there's a character named Lube Man, right, that covers himself in lube and slips through the sewer, and they never catch Lube Man, right? If you followed Peteypedia throughout the entire series, what you find out at the very end is that Petey, the FBI agent, was actually Lube Man the entire time.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy. And you only found that out online following PDpedia, because he gets arrested, right? But that's the reveal then. And they have to close his case file down, and they put out a press release about it and the whole thing. Super, super cool stuff, right? So I love that stuff. And as a fan, why wouldn't you love that stuff? And if fans love that stuff, as a creator, why wouldn't you want to give the fans that stuff? The only reasoning is that, one, you either have this like selfishly myopic view of your own artistic integrity, right? And you're a little too fancy pants, or you're intimidated by it because you say, I don't know how to do that stuff. I don't know how to do a podcast. I don't know how to shoot these extra videos. I don't know how to do it. And you're intimidated by it because you just have a very specific view of yourself. And both, I think, are a shame. But that's the cool thing about today's market is we have, these boxes in our pocket that shoot 4K resolution. We can shoot podcasts and create content so easily now and distribute it through social media and distribute it through the parting of the Red Sea miracle that is the internet. Like that, everything is figure outable. YouTube is the greatest educational tool on the planet. If you need to learn how to change the carburetor in a 1987 Volvo, like I'm sure there's a YouTube video about it, right? So like you can go to google.com and say, how do I make a podcast? And there's going to be 700 articles that'll lead you through it. The intimidation factor shouldn't be there in today's market, but I think typically that is a big factor. That's even a bigger factor than people being snooty about it. Is they're self-defeating in the approach.
Okay, well, let me push back just a little bit on that, because maybe the insecurity comes from this place, right? Like, I hear what you're saying, but it actually feels overwhelming because I don't know if I have a universe in me yet. I'm just trying to write this film, right? Like just this film in front of me. I just want to tell the story of the time that I went on a whitewater rafting trip with my friends in college, and the boat sank and we were stuck in the wilderness and we almost died. And I think it would make a great film. I just want to make that. And I hear you talk about all this universe expanding, and that's what intimidates me. So how help me? How can I see what I perceive as my little film that I just want to tell, this little slice of story, this little moment in time? How I feel intimidated at the idea that I somehow need to figure out how to make that exploitable in more ways than just the way I want to simply tell it.
Sure. But here's the fact of the matter is, and as well as I do, in today's market, if you approach just that story the way you're talking about, odds are you're never going to get the opportunity to tell that story, because the practical aspect is, if you want to make that movie, you're either going to have to sell it off for acquisition, right? Sell the script to somebody, or you're going to have to produce it independently, which means you're going to have to go to an investor and have somebody finance it, right? Or potentially you could go to Kickstarter, right? And the thing about Kickstarter, 98% of the movies on Kickstarter don't get funded. On average, the ones that do get funded on an average of $12,000. Which, listen, if you raise $12,000 to make your movie, mazel tov, that's amazing. I'm going to give you a $12,000 high five and root for you and pray for your success. But ultimately, we have to make this a career. We have to move beyond the $12,000 movie, right? So now we're talking about the acquisition or the investment. In today's market, it's very difficult to be able to get that. It's more difficult than ever before for independent creators to get a private equity investment into their film, and it's because the market's shifted. It's riskier now than ever before to release a movie into the market, because there's so much stuff being pumped into the market. It's oversaturated. It's commoditized, and so right now, if you release a movie into the market, you're not just competing with the other movies in the market. You're competing with other movies in the market and every movie ever made, and all the video games and all the books and all the other things that are dividing people's attention. And I mean, you put something on Netflix, like it just gets lost in the ether, right? And that's if you can get it on Netflix, right? And so now investors are looking at that and say, wait a minute, okay, how, before like 20 years ago, you put a film out, like, you had some space for people to notice you. Now with, with Netflix saying, hey, they're going to be releasing 71 movies in 2021. And like, and it's incredible the amount of content that's being produced. So now investors are looking at that and saying, oh, I don't know. The only way to compete against that is P&A. And if you track P&A, now we're getting sort of like into deep cut filmmaker land here. But if you track like what's happening with P&A, it's absolutely astounding. Where used to be the rule of thumb was you look at the production budget of a film and you put an equal amount into the P&A, right? And so if a $5 million film, we'll spend $5 million to market it. In today's market, everything is so oversaturated with content. Now the P&A is ballooning to even just to be a blip on the radar. You have to spend so much money, and that changes your break even. So Steven Soderbergh had this really interesting article recently where he talked about the death of the independent film industry. And when Steven Soderbergh's talking about the death of independent films, it's a big deal because all this dude does is shoot independent films, micro budget, no budget, low budget, shoestring budget, film, digital, iPhone. He shoots it all, right? He makes studio movies, obviously. He says the reason independent films aren't going to last is that the P&A is getting out of control. And the reason P&A is getting out of control is because of the oversaturation of the market. So he says, now let's say you take a $5 million movie. And he said, in today's market, you have to spend at least $35 million of domestic P&A and $35 million of international P&A just to be a blip on the radar, which is $70 million of P&A just to be a blip. Not even talking about really competing, but you're spending $70 million as just the cost of entry into today's market. So who's bearing that cost? Well, that cost is bared by the distributor, right? It's borne by the distributor. So, but then the distributor is splitting every dollar with the exhibitor. So all of a sudden, I know I'm doing math for the audience, and they're like, these creatives are shaking their fist at me at this point.
Yeah, but they all just jumped over to script notes after you started talking.
Yeah, exactly. Now think about this. So you have $70 million of P&A paid by the distributor, a $5 million production budget. So $70 million has to be paid back in order for this distributor to get paid back. This distributor splits every dollar with the exhibitor, which means you have to make $140 million at the box office for that distributor to make that $70 million back, because every dollar is split in half and split with the exhibitor. Add in the $5 million production budget, all of a sudden a $5 million film has $145 million break even, which is crazy, just to be a blip on the radar. So this is how it affects the independent creator. Is independent creator goes to the businessman or the businesswoman that they need to invest, right? And a lot of times that's not savvy entertainment people. That's like the rich orthodontist down the street that you're just like, hey, can you give me some money? And so all of a sudden you have to convince that investor, say, if you give me $5 million of your money to make my movie, all we have to do is make $145 million at the box office. And guess what? You get all your money back. That makes zero sense. And all of a sudden, the risk increases for the investor. The investor gets nervous, backs away. It's hard to be able to pull that money now, right? And so what's the alternative? Well, I won't spend as much in P&A. Well, what's the problem with that? If you don't spend enough on P&A, now people really aren't going to know that you're here, right? So, and now, now you're seeing things like, guess what happened to the independent film market during COVID? We lost it. We lost it because the lifeblood of independent film is what? Are film festivals for exposure and things like that. Like they all went away, and they did some online stuff, but they really went away. Theater shut down, right? And so now investors are saying, wait a minute, like even pre-COVID, I was kind of interested. What happens when COVID-24 comes and shuts everything down when this film is going to be released? Like I could lose my shirt. Right? Like what do we do here? And so now the risk has increased more and more and more and more. Now we have to figure out as independent creators, new ways to hedge the investment. Right. And so all of a sudden now, like I had an investor tell me recently, he said, Houston, never bring me one project. Always bring me 10 projects. He said, I would much rather invest into a slate than a single project because I know out of 10, 3 are going to lose money, 3 may break even, but or 4 may break even, right? But I'm just kind of hoping and praying that 2 or 3 will pop off and they will overperform to the point that it subsidizes the losses of the rest. It's a resource allocation model that investors are looking at now. And so now all of a sudden, when you bring your single script to an investor, that's hard. You say, I just want to tell my road trip story. I know that's what you want to do. Whether you're going to be able to is going to be a different story. So even if you don't want to lean into transmedia for your own artistic fan base purposes, you're going to have to figure out how to position this film in a way that speaks to investors if you want to be in the game. Or let's say, I don't want to do independent film investment. I'm going to go sell this thing to Netflix. I'm going to go sell this to Amazon. I'm going to go sell it to MGM and Warner Brothers. Well, if you look at what's being optioned now and the way the spec market is if you don't have pre-awareness in the marketplace, if you don't have a fan base, if people don't know you or they don't know your IP, the odds of getting that script sold, unless you're like number 1 on the blacklist or top 5 on the blacklist, almost zero. It's very, very difficult to do that. It's all based on branded IP and pre-awareness of the market, right? So what they'll tell you, and you know this, Jimmy, is let's say they love your script and they'll say, Jimmy, this is what you need to do. You need to go back and you need to find an attachment. And they'll send you off to say, get an actor, get an actress, get a producer, writer, director, somebody that can move the needle, because they're trying to mitigate the risk and trying to establish some pre-awareness. Even if your story doesn't have pre-awareness, the attachment has pre-awareness. Jimmy, how tough is that attachment game in Hollywood to get meaningful attachments? I'm not talking about the supporting character on 3 episodes of the 70s show 15 years ago. I'm talking about getting an A list or a B list or people that can move the needle is so hard.
Yeah.
That's hard, right? If you can get The Rock to attach to your script, don't even think about transmedia. Just go off and make your Rock movie. I give you permission to do whatever you want.
Whole different conversation. Yeah.
Right. But how do you do that? And these are the things that film school doesn't prepare you for, right? These are the traps that you don't, you're like, oh, wait a minute, how am I supposed to do that? But here's the thing. The 2 most optioned things right now in Hollywood, podcasts and short stories on Wattpad. They're being optioned like crazy because the studios are seeing the audience be built and they can look at the analytics. And now if you approach a studio with something that has 20,000 people subscribing to the podcast, you have 100,000 people that read a short story on Wattpad. Now they're looking at that as pre-awareness, right? And it used to be, it just had to be based on a book, right? But now if you can establish some audience early on using some digital mediums, then you bring them, you've established pre-awareness, and it's just the same as selling a book. I had a buddy who went to Paramount, pitched a script to Paramount, and they said, we love it, but we don't know who you are. And the script isn't branded IP. It's too risky. We can't make it. And they said, what we want you to do is we want you to go turn this into a comic book. And if you can sell 10,000 copies of that comic book, guess what I'll do? We'll make your movie. Right. So he walks out thinking, well, I guess that's good in a way, but guess what? He's a screenwriter. He doesn't know how to make a comic book. Right. So what does he do? He sits down, goes to google.com and types in, how do I make a comic book? And started taking the 7 to 12 to 17 to 72 hours reading every article about how to make a comic book. He figured out how where the artist hung out online. He connected with an artist through Fiverr, ended up doing some stuff with him. He's got a guy in Estonia, and he ended up figuring out how to collaborate and put an issue of a comic together that he put out independently on Amazon. He sold enough of that comic book to then roll it into a second issue and then a third issue. And then all of a sudden, a publisher came and picked it up for issue 4, right? And then they're doing issue 5. They're putting it together for a trade paperback. And he's just now getting to the point where he's going to have the 10,000 mark checked off.
Wow.
And guess what he's going to do? He's going to go back to Paramount and say, now I want you to make my movie. So what they were doing is they weren't telling him, we're not judging the quality of the story. We're judging the risk of the project. And we want you to go establish pre-awareness of the market in a different medium. And he was willing to go do that. But here's the punchline, Jimmy, is he says, Houston, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to make my movie with Paramount, but I'm going to keep doing my comic book. Because why? Because I have fans that love the comic book, and it's another source of revenue for me. Right. And here's another reason. I just want to overwhelm you with reasons, Jimmy, I'm going to be your fake lawyer for a second. If you just write something as a script, and it's just a script, and you go and you sell it to a studio, guess what? That studio swoops down with its giant arms, and it's going to be taking every right in every medium to that IP here forever to ever created forever, right? Until Jesus comes back. And then after that too, right? And like they take everything and control everything, and more than likely you're going to get cut out, right? Now, hopefully you can take that check and flip it into something else, but that's the game. So if you have a passion project that you don't want to walk away from, and you don't want it to be controlled, here's what you do. If you can establish that IP in the market, let's just say you self-publish it as a book. When you go to then turn that into a movie, guess what? The studios do a different deal with you. They don't do wholesale acquisition. They license the rights to adapt that book into a movie, which means they take the film and television rights for the adaptation, but you maintain all the ancillary rights to all the other mediums, video games, music, publishing rights, the whole thing, which in success of the movie, all those other things can become very meaningful, financially meaningful, right? And very valuable.
Plus it was licensed, so you get a check for the rest of your life.
100%. You should never, ever, 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 even if you never do transmedia, you should never, ever, ever just go sell a script to a studio before you at least publish it as a book, right? Get it into the marketplace in some way, and because that's just smart business. Now, here's the trick. It doesn't have to be a book. You establish it as a podcast, right? It's the same thing. You establish it as a short story, same thing, right? But all of a sudden, if you attack the market with a little bit of an ecosystem to generate that fan base, and you do a series of TikTok videos that tell a story, you do a web series, you do short stories on Wattpad, you do a podcast, and you figure out how to tactically migrate the audience back and forth and get your TikTok people to go to the podcast, get the podcast people to go check out the web series, and then you aggregate that audience. You now have a puncher's chance to at least get a meeting. Whereas if you didn't have any pre-awareness before, you're probably not going to get the meeting. Even if you have the character piece or your coming of age film that you want to do, you probably won't even get a meeting unless you have an agent. Then how do you get an agent? It's the whole game, right? You know the game. It's just like it's like it feels like dead end after dead end after dead end. Here's the amazing thing. This is why I get super excited about it. This is why I come off as a crazy Pentecostal preacher, is because now nobody can keep you out. We now, through the miracle that's the internet and all the digital platforms and all the tools that we have at our disposal, you could attack the market, go directly to the consumer, directly to the audience. And if you build the audience yourself, they can't keep you out of the market. They can't keep you out because of your race. They can't keep you out because of your gender. They can't keep you out because of your religious observations. Well, they can't keep you out based on where you live. Like a kid in Iowa 20 years ago couldn't break into the industry. Guess what? A kid in Iowa, if he pops 1 million subscribers on TikTok and has a podcast that pops off with 200,000 subscribers, guess what? They're now coming to him.
Right.
And that wasn't possible. It wasn't even possible. And the young people don't understand this, Jimmy. Like, we're old enough to have seen both sides. Right. Like, and so my concern now is that we've been in the internet age so long that we don't recognize the opportunity that's in front of us and how to leverage it. I mean, the fact that we have the world's information in our pocket at all the time, and we have I got the new iPhone, right? The camera on this iPhone is mind-bogglingly good, right? And the fact that we use it just to read about politics on Twitter is a tragedy. Like it's tragic, right? And hopefully they use it to
well, that's
listen
tragic.
to the podcast.
Yeah. Well, that's just reading Twitter is just tragic in and of itself.
In of itself, right?
I know what
exactly.
You're talking.
You guess what I'm saying? It's just like, but if we attack the market, and here's an interesting story for you, and this is how it impacts. I worked with this guy who was producing a documentary, and that was close to his heart. He wanted to go back and produce a documentary back into the ghetto that he grew up in Chicago. He grew up in one of the worst ghettos in the country, a place called Cabrini Green. And it ends up, that was actually, if you ever watched the original Candyman films, it was set in Cabrini Green, right? Cabrini Green was traditionally a very bad place. He grew up there, and they've since bulldozed it and changed it, but there's another government housing project there today. And so he wanted to go shoot a documentary on a kid who's growing up in that government housing facility. And it was like sort of this meta concept of, there's a kid growing up in that government housing unit that wanted to get out, and he had a cell phone, and that kid was shooting a documentary about his life. And this guy wanted to go shoot a documentary about the kid shooting the documentary, right? And so it was sort of this weird meta concept, right? And so, but what was hard for him? Well, the financing of it. He was like, I need a crew. I need to, at least feed my people, right, and things like that. And he said, how do I use transmedia to make this more palatable to investors? Because I keep going to investors and they say there's no market for documentary films unless you pop something like The Tiger King or something like that, or a true crime documentary on Netflix. Like, the documentary space is very difficult to monetize. And now streaming, I think, has done wonders for documentary films, and it's better than it was before, but it's still like not a super great investment for investors traditionally, right? So she said, what do I do? I said, well, let's use the wisdom of Marvel. And he said, well, I don't want to tell anything about superheroes like that. Like, that's, I'm telling a gritty inner city documentary, Houston. Like, don't you get it? I said, yeah. But there's wisdom there, and there's principles that Marvel taps into, right? And if you look up in the sky and you see a 777 flying through the air, right? That 777 is using the law of lift to supersede the law of gravity. And that's how airplanes fly, right? Law of gravity keeps you on the ground, but the law of lift supersedes that, and that's how an airplane flies. So if you look at that and you say, wow, that's amazing. I can't do that because I don't have, $100 million to build a jet, right? No, you don't need to, because if you fold a piece of paper in a very specific way and you throw it across the room, guess what? That little paper airplane uses the law of lift to supersede the law of gravity in the exact same way as that big jet. Now, are there differences? Yes. Like, how many people can ride on it, how far it'll go. Like, there's differences, but the principles are the same. And if you can identify the principles, now we can kind of scale it to where you are. And I said, what you need is a story world, because Marvel has a story world. Lord of the Rings has a story world. Star Wars has a story world. And that's a starting point. So what's the world of the story? What's that sort of that narrative universe that you want to focus on? It's this government housing, place, right? And so it's the project. And so I said, okay, let's build a brand around this place. Why do you want to tell this kid's story? He said, the reason I want to tell this kid's story is I want people to see people drive past this place and they presume that no one special lives there. Right. And I want to show people that some of the most amazing people you'll ever meet in life, some of the most talented, interesting people, live in these terrible places. Right. And they're forgotten about. No one hears their stories. And I want to raise awareness for that. And I said, that is awesome, dude. That's such a meaningful message. I love it. I'm rooting for you. So now let's figure out not how to tell one story. Let's tell lots of different stories about different people in this place. He said, well, now I have to make 6 documentary movies. I said, no. I said, we'll get to that later. But like, who are some other interesting people? And he said, well, there's an old veteran who lives there. I think he was a Korean War veteran or maybe a Vietnam veteran. I can't remember. He was a Purple Heart recipient, right? And he has these amazing war stories, right? But now he's wasting away in this government housing project, and it's tragic. He said there's two little girls who are like 11 years old who are identical twins who always rap on the street corner. Right. And they rap for money, and they use that money to go buy a hamburger so they can split and eat every day. Right. This is a tremendous story. There's this old lady this old like 90-year-old lady that makes food for as many people as she can. She stays busy by just making as many people food as possible, and she delivers it to them from door to door, the people that can't get out. But what's the crazy thing about this lady is she has a potty mouth like a sailor. She curses the entire time. And whenever she delivers your food, she delivers your food and she tells you a dirty joke, like make a grown man blush dirty joke, right? And so
I like this lady. I like this lady. I like it.
Yeah, there we go. Right. So he's telling me these stories. I said, dude, like, okay, this is fantastic. So we kind of sketched out some ideas, and I said, okay, can we produce the music of those little girls and actually get them in a movie? And he's like, I don't know how to produce music. I said, do you know anybody that produces music? Well, I think like my brother-in-law like does some. Okay, great. Call that collaboration in. Call him in. See if we can do something. Let's publish an anthology of short stories from the veteran and his war stories. We can turn them into short stories and put it in a book that we can put on Amazon. Let's have a cookbook for the old lady. And on one page you have the recipe, and on the other page you have the dirty joke, right? and then you have the documentary as well. But see, then you knit them all together. And so in the documentary, you tactically make sure that you show all these people that live in this housing unit, and like have these girls reference some of these other characters in their songs. Make sure that in the cookbook you somehow reference some of the other characters and things like that. And all of a sudden, guess what? You package this for an investor. You take it to the investor and say, I don't want you to invest into a documentary. I want you to invest into a brand. And it's a brand that's rooted in this meaningful purpose. And it's going to have a variety of ways to drive revenue and build audience. I said, so guess what? That investor can make money off the cookbook, making money off the book of short stories, and make money off the music. And so even if the documentary doesn't make any money at all, which it probably won't, because that's the way of documentaries, the success of the other things can potentially subsidize the loss created by the documentary, or potentially the documentary does get picked up by Netflix and then raises awareness for the other products, right? Which gives, and all of a sudden, all this things works together as an ecosystem. And it uses the same wisdom of Star Wars, the same principles of Marvel. It has the same story world approach of Lord of the Rings, but it's set right. It's still within his own idea and his own project, and it completely transforms it to something else, right? That's empowering to a creator. That is, and listen, getting to the Christian angle of it, like Paul says, we need to become all things to all people, right? My thesis talking to the church is you shouldn't just become all things to all people. Your entertainment needs to become all things to all people. Because if we're doing our job and we're embedding our heart and our principles and our worldview into the things that we create, guess what? In today's commoditized market, not everybody does everything. Not everybody watches documentary films. But the message that you put in your documentary film, my nephew that all he does is play video games 12 hours a day, right? Shouldn't he hear that message too? If that message actually is meaningful to you and is close to your heart and as part of your Christian worldview, and we need to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth and become all things to all people, why would you want to limit it to just people that watch documentaries? No. Now we start to view transmedia in a different lens and super stories at different lens as an engine to fuel the good news into as many different avenues and modalities and into as many people as we can, because the entertainment needs to become all things to all people, just like we need to become all things to all people.
Well, this has been fantastic. I feel like we got a little bit of a masterclass today for everyone who was listening. Houston, it's always so much fun just to see your passion about about this, and because I know you actually approach this from the heart of a storyteller, and that's what's kind of fun. Is that I think when people maybe at first hear the idea of transmedia or superstory, it almost feels like a marketing ploy.
It does.
It almost feels like a sale, this is just and I think for a lot of creatives that might maybe turn them off. But even right there, you're the way you laid out that last example with the documentary just really shows this isn't marketing. I mean, marketing can certainly exploit it as well.
Yes.
But what you're talking about is story. And yes. Look, we have to still tell a great story. It all comes down to whether or not we still execute the story at the highest possible level. It has to be a good story, well told.
Yes.
You can't, you can't just expect all this stuff to happen without that central story being great. You still have to follow the principles of what it means to make a great story. But what I hear you saying is, look, your story has stories in it that can still be told and still be, and I love that. So thank you. This was really fantastic.
I love it. And I'm looking forward to kind of jumping in with the Act One crew, as soon as we can, and actually dive into a lot. There's so much practical strategy involved. So looking for the next time that I can kind of get in with those classes and those creators and sort of help build that skill set.
Houston, I'd love to close out our time by praying for you. Is that okay?
100%. Yep. I love it.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time, and thank you so much for Houston. It's just so much fun to hear his passion and his heart for great stories and great storytelling and for storytellers. God, I love what you're doing in and through Houston, and we just pray a blessing on him, pray a blessing on his family, and he's got a new little one. Just pray, thank you for that new little one, a blessing on him and his wife and their new where they live now, and the recent move. And God, just thank you for all the opportunities you're giving. We just pray that you'd give him more opportunities to be able to help filmmakers, help storytellers in crafting their stories to the best of their ability. And we just thank you for this time. Thank you for just this opportunity. And we pray this in Jesus' name, and your promises we stand. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the Act One podcast. Celebrating over 20 years as the premier training program for Christians in Hollywood, Act One is a Christian community of entertainment industry professionals who train and equip storytellers to create works of truth, goodness, and beauty. The Act One program is a division of Master Media International. To financially support the mission of Act One, or to learn more about our programs, visit us online at actoneprogram.com. And to learn more about the work of Master Media, go to mastermedia.com.